One small mistake at a crime scene changed everything. When investigators entered the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Center in London, they expected to find evidence. Instead, they found almost none. The robbers had planned carefully. Security systems had been neutralized. Witness descriptions were limited, and valuables worth millions of pounds had disappeared. Cash, jewelry, gold, precious stones, gone. Yet among the scene, investigators recovered one critical piece of evidence: a single bloody fingerprint. At the time, it appeared insignificant. Later, it would become the key forensic clue that exposed the mastermind behind one of the largest robberies in British history. This is the forensic investigation of the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Robbery, a case that challenged detectives, embarrassed security experts, and triggered a massive Scotland Yard investigation. July 12, 1987, London, England. Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Center. One of the most secure private vault facilities in the country. Its clients included wealthy businessmen, celebrities, aristocrats, and powerful families. Thousands of private deposit boxes were stored behind reinforced security systems. On paper, the facility appeared nearly impossible to rob. Yet investigators would later discover that the offenders had spent months studying every layer of its security. Forensic question number 1. How did the robbers gain such detailed knowledge of the facility? When detectives reconstructed the crime, they quickly noticed something unusual. The offenders knew exactly where to go, exactly which procedures to exploit, and exactly how long they had before authorities became suspicious. This was not a spontaneous robbery. It was a planned operation. Every action suggested preparation. Every movement suggested prior knowledge. The evidence pointed toward one possibility. Someone on the inside may have helped. At this stage, investigators still did not know the identity of the mastermind, but eventually, their investigation led them to a man named Valerio Viccei. Valerio Viccei was born in Italy. His background did not fit the profile many detectives expected. His father was a lawyer, his brother was a lawyer, his family was respected and financially stable. There was no obvious reason for him to enter a criminal life. Yet evidence from his early years revealed a different pattern, a pattern of risk-taking, defiance, and escalating criminal behavior. As a teenager, he became involved in vandalism and organized criminal activity. One documented incident involved the destruction of a television transmission tower using explosives. Investigators later viewed this event as an early indicator. Viccei appeared attracted to danger. The greater the risk, the greater the appeal. 1972, age 17. Major criminal activity begins. Following years, multiple arrests, multiple prison sentences, repeated contact with experienced criminals. But prison did not discourage him. According to later reports, it educated him. Instead of leaving criminal life behind, he expanded his skills, learning from thieves, fraudsters, and professional robbers. When released, his crimes became increasingly sophisticated. Post office robberies, business robberies, armed theft operations. His criminal reputation continued to grow. Witnesses often described him as charming. Police reports described him as dangerous. Both descriptions appeared accurate. By the late 1970s, Italian authorities were paying close attention to him. Viccei believed law enforcement scrutiny was becoming a problem, so he made a decision not to stop committing crimes, but to move somewhere new, somewhere with larger opportunities. Investigative finding the trail eventually led to London. Before arriving in Britain, he traveled through Switzerland. Authorities later discovered he had used bank accounts and false identities during this period. Once in London, he adapted quickly. Although initially limited by language barriers, he began studying his new environment, its systems, its routines, its weaknesses. And before long, he returned to robbery. British banks presented opportunities. Security procedures varied. Some locations relied heavily on appearance and confidence. Viccei understood this. Within a relatively short period, he successfully carried out multiple robberies. The profits were substantial. His lifestyle changed dramatically. Luxury properties, expensive vehicles, high-end social circles. To many people, he appeared to be a successful businessman. Few knew they were looking at a career criminal, but eventually, ordinary robberies no longer satisfied him. He wanted something larger, something capable of delivering a fortune in a single operation. That search led him to one location: the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Center. Target analysis. The facility contained extraordinary wealth, cash, gold, family jewelry, rare watches, important documents. Everything concentrated in a single location. For a professional robber, it represented an almost perfect target. The challenge was security. Direct force would not work. The operation required intelligence gathering, planning, and patience. According to the later investigation, Viccei began visiting the facility as a customer. He rented his own deposit box. He dressed professionally, behaved professionally, and gradually earned the trust of staff. Each visit served a purpose: observation, information collection, surveillance. He studied employee routines, customer movements, security procedures, and eventually, he discovered a critical weakness. Inside the vault complex were private viewing rooms. Customers could examine valuables inside these rooms without surveillance cameras recording them. The feature existed to protect customer privacy. But investigators later concluded that Viccei saw something different: an opportunity, a blind spot, a location where security coverage effectively disappeared. Forensic question number 2. Did he act alone? Investigators eventually concluded the answer was no. Evidence suggested he required inside information, knowledge unavailable to ordinary customers. Knowledge held by someone within the organization itself. Their attention eventually focused on one individual: facility manager, Parvez Latif. Initially, Latif appeared trustworthy. He managed a respected business, worked with wealthy clients, and held a position of responsibility. But investigators later uncovered factors that raised concerns: financial pressure, personal difficulties, and allegations involving drug use. From an investigative perspective, these vulnerabilities were important. Because organized criminals often target weaknesses before they target money. As detectives reconstructed events, they concluded that Viccei gradually built relationships around the facility, collected information, expanded access, and strengthened his plan, month after month. The operation continued to evolve. By mid-1987, the evidence suggested preparations were nearly complete. Vehicles had been arranged, personnel selected, escape plans developed, security weaknesses identified. The target fully understood. Everything was in place. And then, on the morning of July 12, 1987, Valerio Viccei entered the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Center. What followed became one of the most audacious robberies in British history. But investigators would later discover something crucial. The operation was not perfect. During the robbery, someone made a mistake that left behind the only forensic clue detectives would have. One bloody fingerprint, and that fingerprint would eventually unravel the entire case. By the afternoon of July the 12th, 1987, the operation entered its most dangerous phase. Months of planning had succeeded. The robbers were inside the vault. Security personnel had been neutralized, and millions of pounds in valuables were now within reach. But from an investigative perspective, this was also the moment when the plan began to unravel. The operation began exactly as planned. Valerio Viccei entered the facility with an associate posing as a customer. Manager Parvez Latif personally guided them through the premises. Eventually, they entered a private viewing room inside the vault complex. Investigators later identified this room as a critical location. Why? Because surveillance cameras could not see inside. The blind spot had become part of the plan. Once inside, the robbery began. Latif was quickly controlled. Security staff were isolated and restrained. Additional personnel were lured into vulnerable positions. Within minutes, the offenders had effectively taken control of the facility. To detectives examining the case later, the efficiency was striking. The gang knew where guards would be. They knew response procedures. They knew communication patterns inside the building. Nothing appeared improvised. Every action suggested preparation. Then came the first mistake. A mistake investigators would later find extremely revealing. Communication failed. According to the investigation, members of the gang waiting outside could not be reached. The radios had been set to the wrong frequency. Viccei repeatedly attempted contact. Nothing. No response. The error forced him to leave the building personally and retrieve his accomplices. For the robbers, it was an inconvenience. For investigators, it was evidence. Evidence that even highly organized criminals make mistakes. And mistakes often create opportunities for law enforcement. The communication problem created delays. The gang was now behind schedule. This mattered because a routine security inspection was expected later that day. The robbers were racing against the clock. As a result, they began working aggressively. Deposit boxes were attacked throughout the vault. Locks were forced open. Contents were removed, and valuables began piling up rapidly. When investigators later documented the scene, the scale was extraordinary. Gold, diamonds, cash, luxury watches, rare jewelry, precious stones. Valuable property appeared everywhere. One investigator reportedly described the vault as resembling a treasure cave. Yet, despite their efforts, the gang could only access a fraction of the facility. Thousands of deposit boxes remained untouched. Time was running out. Then came the second mistake, the mistake that ultimately solved the case. Viccei cut himself. The injury appeared minor. In the middle of the robbery, he likely paid little attention to it. His priority was escape, not evidence preservation. But investigators later discovered blood left behind at the crime scene. The robbers escaped. The blood did not. Shortly before the scheduled inspection, the offenders left the building, disguised, carrying enormous amounts of stolen property. They loaded the valuables into waiting vehicles and disappeared. By the time security officials arrived, the robbery was already over. Police officers entering the scene faced a difficult challenge. Millions of pounds were missing. Thousands of customers were potentially affected. Witnesses were limited. Evidence was scarce, and no suspects had been identified. At first glance, the robbers appeared to have gotten away with it, but detectives quickly reached one conclusion. The offenders possessed too much knowledge. They understood procedures, schedules, security weaknesses, response times. Someone inside the facility had almost certainly helped. The question was simple: who? While investigators searched for answers, forensic specialists examined the crime scene. That examination produced a breakthrough, a bloody fingerprint, one piece of evidence, one potential lead. Today, DNA technology dominates many investigations. In 1987, fingerprints remained one of the most powerful forensic tools available. The print was compared against British criminal databases. No match. Investigators were disappointed, but not discouraged. If the offender was foreign, British records might contain nothing. The search expanded internationally. Eventually, a response arrived from Italy. The fingerprint belonged to a known criminal, Valerio Viccei. Suddenly, the case had direction. Detectives now had a name, a criminal history, a pattern of behavior, and a potential mastermind. Investigators learned about his robberies in Italy, his prison history, his reputation for calculated risk-taking, and his luxurious lifestyle. But identifying him was only half the battle. Finding him would be much harder, because by the time detectives identified him, he had already left Britain. Meanwhile, public reaction intensified. News coverage spread rapidly. Customers crowded outside the facility. Many wanted answers. Some had lost family heirlooms, others had lost jewelry collections, cash reserves, investments, generational wealth. The estimated losses continued increasing. £5 million, £20 million, £40 million, even higher. No one could determine the exact total immediately. The robbery was no longer a local crime. It had become an international investigation. Among the stolen property was an extremely valuable diamond connected to one of Europe's wealthiest families. Rare watches disappeared. Luxury jewelry vanished. Precious metals were gone. Pressure on investigators continued to grow, yet detectives remained focused on a different question: the inside accomplice. Initially, multiple employees were examined. Background investigations were conducted. Relationships were scrutinized. One theory suggested that an employee may have been manipulated by Viccei. Given his reputation for charm and persuasion, the theory seemed plausible, but the evidence gradually pointed elsewhere, toward one individual, Parvez Latif, the facility manager, and supposedly one of the victims. As detectives dug deeper, warning signs emerged: financial difficulties, business problems, insurance changes before the robbery, allegations involving substance abuse. Each discovery strengthened the theory. From an investigative standpoint, motive and opportunity were beginning to overlap. Then came another major breakthrough. The victim was now a suspect, and the investigation entered an entirely new phase. While detectives built the conspiracy case, Viccei made another mistake, perhaps the biggest mistake of all. He came back. He had escaped with millions. He possessed international connections. He had opportunities to disappear permanently. Yet he returned, and according to investigators, one reason involved a luxury Ferrari. Viccei had ordered the vehicle and intended to collect it personally. The decision exposed him. British authorities already knew his identity. Surveillance operations intensified. Known associates were monitored. Coordination between British and Italian law enforcement increased. Then finally, investigators got their chance. Approximately 1 month after the robbery, officers observed Viccei leaving a luxury hotel in London. He was driving the Ferrari. Police moved in immediately. The arrest occurred before he could leave the country. The mastermind behind one of Britain's most famous robberies was finally in custody. Investigators now shifted focus towards stolen property. Some valuables were recovered, others had already entered international criminal networks. Eventually, approximately £10 million worth of property was recovered. Among the recovered items was the famous stolen diamond, but much of the loot was never found. Even today, the full amount permanently lost remains uncertain. As evidence accumulated, prosecutions followed. Parvez Latif was convicted for his role in the conspiracy. Additional gang members were arrested. Multiple prison sentences were handed down. Viccei himself received a lengthy sentence. Authorities also linked him to other criminal activity. His criminal record continued expanding, but the story did not end there. After serving part of his sentence in England, Viccei was transferred back to Italy. Years later, while benefiting from temporary release privileges, he once again became involved in criminal activity. April 2000. Italy. Police encountered Viccei on a rural road. According to reports, an exchange of gunfire followed. When the confrontation ended, Valerio Viccei was dead. Authorities reportedly recovered weapons and criminal equipment from his vehicle. Even after decades of arrests and imprisonment, he had never abandoned the life of crime. The Knightsbridge safe deposit robbery remains a remarkable investigative case study. The offenders spent months planning. They studied security systems. They recruited an insider. They exploited vulnerabilities. And they escaped with millions. Yet, despite all that preparation, the investigation succeeded because of several fundamental principles of detective work. Crime scenes matter, motives matter, timelines matter, and forensic evidence matters. The robbers controlled almost every part of the operation, but they could not control everything. One small injury, one drop of blood, one fingerprint. That single forensic clue gave detectives the lead they needed, and ultimately helped solve one of the largest armed robberies in criminal history.